My name is JJ and I am a reader, a writer, and a general story nerd, I guess we'll put it that way. I work in the book publishing industry. I'm also in the process of writing my own novels, and today I have a book review. This book came out in 2018, An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green, and I ordered it immediately upon hearing about it. I received it. It sat on my shelf until literally like a couple days ago. And then I started reading it via an audiobook from the library because the way that my adulthood has gone, reading books is way harder than listening to them. So I'm very glad that Libby had an audiobook copy. Because of that, my perspective on this book is going to be based off of the audiobook, not off of the physical hard copy that I have. However, I'm very glad that I have this physical hard copy because it means that I can reread it and highlight things and go back to the segments that like I really appreciated about this book. First of all, let's just get right into this. There will be some minor spoilers, so if you haven't read this book and you want to read this book and you don't want spoilers, come back after you've read it. If you don't care, then by all means stick around and we will talk about it. An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. This book is about a girl, April May, who discovers a statue, discovers this statue in the middle of Manhattan that immediately, well, on second glance, draws her attention and makes her stop to pay attention. This is a very Hank Green thing to write about. If you follow him, if you follow the Vlog Brothers, you'll know that some of Hank's passion points are art, creativity, and taking time to notice little things, which is part of why he's so interested in science and all of that other stuff that he's interested in, which is a lot of things. He does a lot of things. However, one of the reasons that, so this is a very Hank Green book, which like shouldn't surprise people when he's the one who wrote it. But if you're familiar with his voice, you can absolutely hear his voice in his fiction, which is kind of a fun, unique, rare thing. I've only ever had that happen with other authors when I know the authors, right? So like if the book that I'm reading was written by one of my dear friends, I'm far more likely to recognize and hear their voice in that work than I am from, someone who's a relative stranger to me. Hank and I have been in the same room once, but we've never met. Which that's just the way that the internet works, right? It's a strange thing that I can be so familiar with him that I can hear his voice, his passion, his perspectives in this character. And because of that, it's an interesting thing. It's something that happens with authors when it's their first book. And Hank, I don't know if you've written other books. I don't even know if you're going to watch this. But if you've written other books prior to writing this book, I would be surprised if you had, actually, because April May is very much a rendition of Hank Green in fictional form. Which happens by default no matter what no matter what you do. There are aspects of the author that will show up into every single character that they write. However, this is a particularly obvious case. Things that April views about the world and fame and art and the point of humanity in some regards. That is all coming directly out of my understanding. So I might be wrong, but coming directly out of my understanding of Hank's perspectives on the world. And you can see those different aspects of him in these characters, right? So there's Miranda, the scientist. There's Andy, the best friend, who is trying to be internet famous before anything cool happens, right? Like, he has a podcast with his best friend. He has a YouTube channel, which is where he and April post this video about what becomes known as the Carls, this robot. And there's things about that are very, very, very based in Hank Green and Hank Green's identity, and even more to an even further extent, the reality that happens when you become a personal brand, right? Where you are still a person, but you are also a brand, and what that looks like and what that means, and that how those two things can interrelate, right? Who I am as JJ Hanna is different to some extent than who I am in my daily life. That's not to say that I'm like faking it on the internet. I'm not. I'm just being a more exaggerated version of me in some ways, right? And that's something that happens, I think, to a lot of people when they show up online. And so if you meet them in person and then you see them online, you're going to get two very different people, because online it's a very performative thing, whether we intend for it to be or not. So it feels very meta to be making this this review of this book that is so much about what happens when you become famous on the internet and posting it on the internet. This is a very meta thing to do. Secondly, I mentioned that this book came out in 2018. I started my YouTube channel in 2018, and I was doing kind of the thinking back to even why I started thinking about YouTube as a platform for authors. And a lot of it, I think, if I'm remembering right, is because of the marketing for this book. So this is an even more meta scenario. All of this is, I tell you all of this because it plays into my experience with this book. This book is not about aliens. In fact, the Carls have very little to do with the actual plot. The main thing that happens with the Carls is that they show up. That is like all that happens. That is not the plot of this book. The plot of this book is not the Carls are here, now what? The plot of this book is this girl rose to fame, now what? And how that impacts her, how that impacts her relationships, how that impacts her friendships, how that impacts her success, her fame, her understanding of the world. All of that is what this book is about. Which is so nifty to me that Hank was able to write a first contact with aliens story that is marketed as sci-fi, and that is absolutely, by very few accounts, actually a sci-fi novel, okay? I feel you have to understand this going into this book. This is not what you would call a sci-fi novel. Strange things happen. Strange things do happen. I will give you that, right? I would almost say that's more magical realism than sci-fi. It's only sci-fi because the answer is aliens and not magic. Otherwise, it's magical realism where it's strange things start happening in our world. But it is a social commentary on what happens when people become famous, and various different aspects of that, right? What happened for April when she became famous is not what happened for Andy, even though they got famous at the same time for the same reason through the same thing, which is an interesting commentary to make. Same thing with Miranda. Miranda, our scientist, she got connected to April largely by chance because April said something in the video. Miranda said that shouldn't be possible. Miranda reached out. April eventually got back to her after the sea of emails that happen when you go viral, supposedly. I've never been viral. I wouldn't know. But in that sea of emails, eventually Miranda and April connect and they meet up to give the Carls what they're asking for, right? And again, the Carls are an acting force, but not in a active way, right? Which is also such an interesting, unique way to tell a story, right? The Carls are absolutely a character, but they're also not until the very, very, very end actually active in the plot. Everything about them is, here's a puzzle, very Ready Player One, right? In the same way that our millionaire, billionaire, whoever that guy is in Ready Player One, who sets up this hunt for the Easter eggs in, oh, it's been so long since I've read Ready Player One. Generally speaking though, the guy who set up the hunt for the Easter eggs in the Oasis, that's the word I was looking for, in the first place, he is an active participant in the plot but he doesn't actually show up until the very end because most of his action is in sending people on these random goose chases to go find these Easter eggs on this scavenger hunt, if you will. The same thing happens in An Absolutely Remarkable Thing. The Carls show up. To anybody who's paying attention, they start giving these different clues. And I think the most interesting thing about this is, obviously, we didn't get this in the storyline because we were following somebody who was paying attention the whole time. But I think what's so interesting to me about An Absolutely Remarkable Thing is that there are so many people in the world of this book, right? The universe of this book, which is our world but slightly to the left. If I was in this world, I unfortunately would have been somebody who heard about the Carls once and then just didn't pay any attention to it, because I would have said hey, yeah, that's strange. Okay, how odd. Somebody did this massive multi-continent, multi-country art installation. Cool. Oh, people think they might be aliens? Ha, that's strange. And I would have just gone about my daily life up until I started having the dream, and I still wouldn't have been paying enough attention, right? Because, again, assuming you haven't read the book, eventually the Carls are giving everybody this, what's known as a contagious dream. It's spread from person to person. After you meet somebody who has the dream, you start having access to the dream to solve these puzzles and do all of that. Even once I had the dream, if I had this recurring dream every single night, I don't think I would have gone the extra mile to pay enough attention to solve all of the puzzles. As much as I like to think that I would have, right? In my best idealist self version of myself, I might have done that. Realistically speaking, I don't think I would have been that involved with the Carls. I would have been huh, that's cool. Even though that it's this huge big thing, because think about all of the other huge big things that happen in the world on a routine basis, right? I don't even follow the news. I should, but I don't. And so there's things that are happening, big things that are happening all the time, that if they don't get to my inner circle of people talking about them, they won't get my attention. This book is interesting for so many reasons, because it makes me think on so many different levels, right? This does what any good literary fiction should do. It makes you assess something and think about it. That is also the case with, everything that April says about fame, everything that happens when she suddenly has money, when she suddenly has a platform and she's thinking about, what am I going to do with it? I have this voice and that people are listening to. I want to do something effective with it. That question, what am I going to say if I ever actually have people who are listening, right? Which obviously right now I'm on YouTube. I do have people who are listening to me. This is the plug. Go like and subscribe. So that maybe there's going to be more than 100 of you at some point when people are seeing this, right? But all that to say, in the event that I ever have 500 people subscribed or 1,000 people subscribed, in the event that I ever have more than that, right? The strange possible reality where I have 1 million subscribers somewhere, which I can't even comprehend right now at this juncture. What would I want to use my platform for? What change would I want to help drive in the world? What focus do I want people to have that I end up connected with, right? April, for better or worse, ends up in the same conversation as the Carls every time. She cannot avoid being connected to that conversation because she intentionally inserted herself into it and stayed there. To the point where she's having meetings with the President of the United States because they think that she might know something more about them than they do, which is true 9 times out of 10, right? It's worth thinking about, especially, and this book is so much more impactful now in 2024 than it would have been, I think, in 2018. So if you haven't read it yet, now is still a fantastic time to go read it. Because the ability to go viral online, the ability to be internet famous, right? That was still kind of a new thing when I was in college and starting my YouTube channel. The ability to be internet famous since 2007 when John and Hank Green started, until 2018 when this book came out, and to now, 2024 as I'm filming this, by the time you see it, probably 2025, it is so much easier to be famous online. And because of that, this is a very, very important book. And it's an important line of reasoning to think about, right? Because like we see people all the time having greatness thrust upon them. And we also see people now going out and chasing that greatness. There's always this dichotomy, right? There will be people who want it so desperately and who can never seem to get it. And then the people who don't want it at all, like April, who eventually get it and become addicted to it and then don't want it to ever stop, right? So it's a very, very interesting simultaneous warning, criticism, critique, and in general commentary on what does it mean to be in the world's eyes, right? What happens to you? Do you lose your humanity? Do you become more than a human? Do you become larger than life? Are you like, what happens? Like there's many scenes where April May uses her clout to get what she wants, right? To skip the line to go see Hollywood Carl, or to walk into a random coffee shop, say, "Hi, I'm April May, I need a computer," and have somebody in attendance be willing to let her borrow it, right? Which is such a funny thing because there are certain people, like I want to say that I would not react that way. And on the other hand, the most ironic statement of that is that if Hank Green walked into the coffee shop I was in and he needed a computer, I would absolutely let him borrow mine, right? Because there are people who have that power, and it's such an interesting thing, and I think a lot of it comes down to whether we trust those people, but ultimately those people are strangers. So it's just such an interesting reflection of how our world functions with fame. Even more than aliens. I mean, I think the fact that the world seemed to take this whole alien thing so well says a lot about how much faith Hank Green has in humanity. I also think he reflected that properly with, you know, the Defenders movement being what they are, being afraid of them, wanting to attack the Carls. I think there's something to that view of humanity as well, which says people are not inherently good. There will always be people whose first response is violence. And most of that will come out of fear, but there will always be people who are bolstering that response. And so what it takes to be the kind of person who says more intentionally, I'm actively choosing to be nonviolent in a world where violence is increasingly the answer. I think that's such an important message as well. So there's a lot of things to think about in this book. This gave me a lot of things, like I said, just a lot of food for thought, both about my chosen career path as aspiring author goes, aspiring YouTuber goes, aspiring book producer goes, right? There's a lot of things to think about in this book. And most of them are not how would I respond to an alien race. Which is why I say it's sci-fi, but it's not really sci-fi. It's sci-fi because it's aliens. Everything else about it is just social commentary in fiction form, which is a brilliant and beautiful way to do that. I've seen some critiques online about April's character. You know, I was reading through some other book reviews on Goodreads when I was posting mine, and there's some merit to all critique, always. There's always some merit to all critique. However, I think there's also something incredibly vulnerable about being in Hank Green's position and writing a character who achieves fame and fortune, who doesn't want it, who ends up with it, ends up craving it, and doing that in such a vulnerable way, right? Sharing the insecurities that April has about being famous, sharing the insecurities she has about being on camera, sharing the insecurities she has about speaking to the masses and being a voice who's supposed to know things, who doesn't necessarily know things, right? It's a very interesting, especially with the rise of TikTok since this book came out. I can only imagine that Hank Green's anxiety has actually skyrocketed more than he would ever let on. Mine would absolutely skyrocket more than I would ever want to let on. Because it's a heavy, hard position to be in. So anyway, all that to say, I really liked this book. I gave it 5 stars on Goodreads. I look forward to going through this segment again and, or this copy again and rereading it and highlighting different things, because there's things about it that are, you know, that if I could stop and quote things, I would love to do that. It's not the book for you if you don't like Hank Green. I don't know how else to say that plainly. If you don't, you know, if you don't like his style of humor, if you don't like his storytelling versions, if you don't enjoy his quirks and mannerisms, you're probably not going to like this book, because it's a very Hank Green book. It's a very Hank Green book. But that's what happens when you have somebody with such a developed voice writing a debut novel. It becomes almost a physical representation of that person's voice, right? And I think the narrator that I had with the audiobook, they did a very good job portraying April. It took me a little bit to get used to her voice, but that's not a common thing. That's a me thing. She was exactly the right narrator for April. And after I got used to her, it was totally fine. I just found the segment that I wanted to quote from, so I'm going to read that little segment real quick here. Because it feels important in this video where I'm talking about fame and fortune and the commentary that this book has. This comes from chapter 9 in my copy. It's on pages 119 through 121. We're going to skip through some of this a little bit. Most attributes a person has are, at least in some way, defined by them. They are good at soccer. They are funny. They know a lot about the history of Rome. They have blonde hair. Some of these things are things that the person worked for. Some are just things that they just happen to have, but they are all characteristics of the person. Fame is not this way. Imagine if you looked different to every person who saw you. Not like some people thought you were more or less attractive, but one person thinks you're a 65-year-old cowboy from Wyoming, complete with boots and a hat and leathery skin, and the next person sees an 11-year-old girl wearing a baseball uniform. You have no control over this, and what you look like has nothing to do with the life you have lived or even your genome. You have no idea what each person sees when they look at you. That's what fame is like. You think this sounds like beauty because we sometimes say that beauty is all in the eye of the one beholding the beauty. And indeed, we don't get to decide if we are beautiful. Different people will have different opinions, and the only person who gets to decide if I'm attractive is the person looking at me. But then there is some consensus about what attractive is. Beauty is an attribute defined by human nature and culture. I can see my eyes and my lips when I look in the mirror. I know what I look like. Fame is not this way. A person's fame is in everyone's head except their own. You could be checking into your flight at the airport and 999 people will see you as just another face in the crowd. The 1,000th might think you're more famous than Jesus. As you can imagine, this makes fame pretty disorienting. You never know who knows what. You never know if someone is looking at you because they think you're attractive, or because you went to college with them, or because they've been watching your videos or listening to your music or reading about you in magazines for years. You never know if they know you and love you. Worse, you never know if they know you and hate you. Okay, and then we're going to skip ahead a little bit. I've had the opportunity to do more thinking about fame than most people, but fame isn't some monolithic thing. It isn't the same for the local weatherman as it is for Angelina Jolie. So let's talk a little bit about April May's theory of tiered fame. Tier 1, popularity. You are a big deal in your high school or your neighborhood. You have a peculiar vehicle that people around town recognize. You are a pastor at a medium to large church. You were once the star of the high school football team. Tier 2, notoriety. You are recognized and or well-known within certain circles. Maybe you're a preeminent lepidopterist whom all the other lepidopterists idolize. Or you could be the mayor or meteorologist in a medium-sized city. You might be one of the 1.1 million living people who has a Wikipedia page. Tier 3, working class fame. A lot of people know who you are, and they are distributed around the world. There's a good chance that a stranger will approach you to say hi at the grocery store. You are a professional sports player, a musician, author, actor, television host, or internet personality. You might still have to hustle to make a living, but your fame is your job. You'll probably trend on Twitter if you die. Tier 4. True fame. You get recognized by fans enough that it is a legitimate burden. People take pictures of you without your permission, and no one would scoff if you called yourself a celebrity. When you start dating someone, you won't be surprised to read about it in magazines. You're a performer, politician, host, or actor whom the majority of people in your country would recognize. Your humanity is so degraded that people are legitimately surprised when they find out that you're just like them, because sometimes you buy food. You never have to worry about money again, but you do need a gate with an intercom on your driveway. Tier 5. Divinity. You are known by every person in your world, and you are such a big deal that they no longer consider you a person. Your story is much larger than can be contained within any human lifetime, and your memory will continue long after your earthly form wastes away. You are a founding father of a nation, a creator of a religion, an emperor, or an idea. You are not currently alive. There's a lot of things about this that I really appreciate. It's one segment that when I was listening to it, I wanted to go back and listen to it again, which is why I'm glad, again, that I have this hard copy that I can read from. It is one of those segments of thinking about fame and classifying even recognition, right? That it becomes a little bit tempting to figure out, where do I fall into that? Where do I want to be in that? Like, is there going to be a segment of my life where I am content at tier 2 versus tier 3, right? Do I actually want tier 4? And that's when I think the biggest thing that this book has made me think about is in relation to myself and my own goals, my own ambitions, my own dreams, my desires, what I'm aiming for, looking at it through this lens from the perspective of someone who has lived it, who I know has been as honest as possible about the impact, not necessarily about the experience, but about the impact in this book, right? Do I want to change my goals? Do I want to change my ambitions? Ultimately, am I okay with a quiet life? And if I'm not okay with a quiet life, how loud do I want my life to be? These are the big questions that I've been mulling over even before I got to this book. This book just happened to give me words to think about them better. Anyway, all that to say, reading this book right now at this time was absolutely what needed to happen in my life. And that's one of the most beautiful things about books, I think, is that release year makes very little difference in how impactful a book will be. And I think in the publishing industry, it's very difficult to keep my eye on that sometimes, because a book will reach the right reader exactly when it needs to reach them at any point in time. I mean, I say this all the time about some of my favorite books of all time, right? For example, if you've been around here, you know these books. This book, talked about this one a lot. This one released in 2007 from an imprint of a publishing house that I'm not even sure even exists anymore, right? I got it in 2013 from my friend who got it in 2012, and then once I kept it, I never got rid of it. I decided that this book is mine now, and it will stay on my shelf probably until the day I die. Because it reached me at exactly the right time, exactly when I needed it, and exactly when I needed to read it. And I think that's the same thing that happened with this one. It's going to stick with me a really long time because it reached me at exactly the right moment in exactly the right way. Talking about and discussing the things that I was already thinking about totally unintentionally. I didn't really read anything about it before I clicked play. I mean, I knew vaguely what it was because obviously I bought it, but even then I hadn't looked into it before I bought it because I bought it off of a pre-order promo that just said, Hank's Green Book is available, go buy it, right? Which is kind of what happens when I pre-order things. You know, as a marketing director, it is my job to pay attention to how people buy things. And I think that there's a segment of that market who is buying things that literally it doesn't matter what the product is, it matters more who they're hearing about it from. And that will make it an automatic purchase, right? I'm that way for a couple authors now. Obviously I did that for this book. I'm definitely this way for this author. And I'm also that way for any new Percy Jackson books that come out. I just buy things immediately because they're the new Percy Jackson book. And that's something that, being a conscious consumer, it's something that I probably should work on. And on the other hand, I'm happy to be what people would refer to as a top fan in all of those scenarios because I love what I'm buying. I'm always content with the product, right? Not to be too markety in this book review, but it seems important that I talk about that because this book really, it hit me in the right ways, right? I'm definitely part of the target audience for this book, which means that if you have ever wanted to be famous on YouTube, famous on TikTok, an author, you want to go viral, you want to be recognized, and you want fame or notoriety, you should read this book. I don't know that it'll impact you the way that it impacted me, but the messages in this book are vital for you to think about before you pursue that line of work. Food for thought. Anyway, that was an absolutely remarkable thing. Less of a review, more of a commentary, but it's kind of a review in that I just wanted to think about and talk about the book some more and how it impacted me. I'm going to be thinking about that book for a really long time, especially as I'm making my plans, my thoughts, and dreaming about my future and thinking about my future. Even setting my own goals for where I hope to be in a year, in 5 years, in 7 years, in 10 years, right? Like doing that 5-year plan thing, which is always so frustrating and obnoxious, but, setting up the plans to figure out, like, is this a dream or is this something that I actually want, right? Is it something that I think would be nice or is it something that I want to pour money and time and effort and energy into? Is this something that I'm okay with being just a hobby? Or will I be severely disappointed if this thing never happens, right? There's things like that that I think are really vital aspects to thinking about your own future, and especially now that I'm, an adult. Still in denial about that. But now that I'm an adult, there's things that I am thinking about a little bit more realistically than when I was coming straight out of college. And that isn't to say that I couldn't think about them this way straight out of college. It's just to say I didn't even think that I had to think about them this way because it felt like it was going to happen. Like if I just willed hard enough, all of these things would fall into place. And that has not been the case for me. That might be the case for you. It has not been the case for me. And so it's become important for me to think a lot of these things through very seriously and figure out what are the things that I really desperately want out of my life and when do I need to do them so that I can enjoy them. I loved this book. It made me think about it a lot. I've been talking nonstop for about half an hour about this book, and it's an important book that I read this year. 10 out of 10 or 5 out of 5, however you want to do that one. I would say that this is actually more information than I put in my Goodreads review. But as books that impact you go, this is going on the top of my list. If you want to get a copy, I will put a link to purchase down below, because that would be good. And if not, well, I hope you enjoyed this review. I hope you've enjoyed this book. If you also were impacted this way and you want to chat about it, hit me up. Either leave a comment or send me a message on like Instagram or something. Handles are here. You can go check that out. And until next time, I will see you then. Don't forget to like and subscribe and leave a comment. And if you have other books like this that you think I should read, I would love your recommendations. Okay. See you later. Bye.